Hello. Today I want to do my reading wrap up for both March and April. 2 months in one because I only read 6 books in 2 months. It's not been great. Somehow reading's not really working out great for me. So I just thought, get over myself, wrap up 2 months and hope for bigger, better things to come. Because not all of these books are really fresh in my memory. I've sorted them from least memorable to most impactful. So the first book I'm going to start with is the one I remember the least from. It's Imperium by Kracht. I listened to it on audiobook because that was what my library had and I didn't feel like spending money on it. Even though I'm German, I don't tend to love German books. So it's not that surprising that I didn't love it. Imperium is about the somewhat true story of August Engelhardt in the early 20th century, who travels to Papua New Guinea, which at the time was colonized by Germany, buys a small island, wanting to start a religious commune based on worshipping the coconut and nudism. And it's his story. He meets side characters that are also somewhat real. I also found the audiobook in my library underneath in the biography section, which I think is a bit far-fetched. I did think it read like a fiction novel. But yeah, I read it together with some friends of mine in a book club, and they all read the English translation, which they said was very, very well translated. I listened to the original, and perhaps part of the merit of the translated book was actually that it was so well translated. On the whole, I feel German novels can be a bit long-winded. Sentences are quite long. Often the German books will be thicker than the English translations. It's just, we have long words in German. So not that much stuck for me. Again, the people I read it with thought it was very funny. I just thought it was so. A bizarre read, but not one that is sticking with me now that I've finished reading it. The next book I read, the book that I remember the least, second to least, it's going to confuse me, is Mr. Splitfoot by Samantha Hunt. My dad sent this to me. He finished reading it saying, it was so, and then sent it to me, which, great. It is the story of 2 women, Ruth and Cora. Ruth grows up in a kind of foster home headed by a sort of religious fanatic, and her niece, Cora, falls unwantedly pregnant. Is that a word? Unwantedly? Becomes pregnant and she doesn't want it. And Ruth turns up suddenly, now an adult, to go on a road trip with her. And we have these two timelines. On the one hand, Ruth as a child, growing up with these other foster kids, and in present day, I want to say, Cora, who goes on this road trip led by her aunt, not knowing where it's going to take her. There are a lot of mystical, dreamlike sequences in this book, so you don't really know what's going on. You kind of have to figure it out, and that paired with writing that I found very based on the dialogue made it difficult for me to really get into it, even though I'm not opposed to sort of mystical elements in the books I read. And as the book progresses, it gets more and more sort of spiritual woo-woo-y for me. So that's kind of where I signed off. Didn't love it. And there's a bit of a twist, which I also didn't love. So Mr. Splitfoot did not work great for me. After looking it up on Goodreads, this author has written 2 other books that I'm actually more intrigued to read, just going by the plot. Then the next book I want to talk about is The End of the Affair by Greene. This was published in 1951 and is a small little book, even though I can't show you. And it is written from the point of view of Maurice Bendrix, I believe, and he starts an affair with the wife of his acquaintance friend Henry. This affair has ended in the past though, and in the book he hires a private investigator to find out why the affair was ended by the woman. And I was surprised by how raw all the emotions felt. It's written from his point of view, so he's struggling with what he believes is this unrequited love. As the story unfolds, the sort of theme of religion comes into it. Both the female affair and Benrix himself struggle with coming to terms what their own religion means to them, if they believe in a god or not, if they believe the god to be good or not. And I didn't hate it, which is saying quite a lot for me, because I'm not too keen on religious themes in fiction on the whole. It's just something that didn't interest me too much, so quite often when I read about it, I tend to think, well, get over yourself, you believe in God or you don't, no big deal, it's fine. So I didn't hate it, I actually thought it was really well done. And I really liked the ending. It's not like fireworks ending, but I do recommend it. And it's a small book. I read it to try and get over this reading slump that I've been having, and it was a good read. Next, I read 2 thrillers, so I'll try to not confuse those. The first was I Let You Go by Clare Mackintosh, I believe. I came across this recommendation on a YouTube channel, which I don't remember what it's called now, but if I do, I'll mention it down in the box. I Let You Go is about a hit and run where a young boy is killed, and the police on the one side trying to find out who the killer is, and our main protagonist Jenna, who's trying to escape it, and these two converging storylines basically. The book gets harder and harder to read as we go on, and pulled me in more and more because of it. The one big issue that I did have with it though, which is something that some people might really, really like, I could have done without all the family background, personal issues, troubled teenage son that the main investigator is having at home. I just tend to not care about those things. When I read a thriller, I want to know who found out about it, and if there's some interesting twist with a character, then that's cool too. But whether or not the marriage of the police investigator is still fresh or not, I don't care about. The other, I want to say, thriller crime novel, never sure about the distinction, that I read was The Lost, which is the first in a series, I believe, which is the Paula McGuire series about a forensic psychologist. And in the book The Lost, Paula returns to her childhood home, which is somewhere along the Irish border, to help the investigation of missing people cases, especially because 2 girls have gone missing from this small town, which is pretty unheard of, or is it unheard of? And she's supposed to help the police investigate this. I was drawn to the book on the one hand because it was super cheap on Amazon, and because the main character is a forensic psychologist. I thought that might be a sort of interesting twist on a normal crime novel. In the beginning of the book, I did find myself thinking, how is she relevant? How is she helping the investigation? She's just reading a lot of files and being stubborn. But as the book goes on, I kind of start thinking, okay, fair enough, she's not just this tropey psychologist who has this knack for understanding how people feel. So I thought it was quite cool. I also liked how how in the book, the political and religious issues that have been reigning in Ireland for a long time aren't ignored, and even part of the plot and the difficulties in investigating cases that are happening close to the border, just because of issues between... Sorry, my dog just threw a bone across the room. Lovely. Yeah, so I really like the setting of Ireland and how that did actually play into the storyline itself. And I want to read on. It's the first in a series of, I think, 6. So the fact that I want to read on is already saying quite a lot. And then finally, The 6 books that I did not read last, but was the most memorable to me, was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This was majorly impactful on all kinds of booktube channels 1-2 years ago. I don't want to say anything wrong. It's again a short book of a letter written by Ta-Nehisi Coates to his son about what it means to be a black person living in the United States. At times, I actually felt like I wasn't the target group. I mean, I'm not his son, yeah, but like that, I couldn't get into some of the topics just because I've not been socialized in America. Some of the names he mentions, I'd have to sort of Google. They just weren't as prominent in the news here. But having said that, I do think anyone can and everyone should read it. There were passages about education and the author's sort of critical view on education sort of ruining the curiosity of a child, which is something I care about and that interests me, totally irrespective of your colour or your background. And I thought it was excellently written. Those were the 6 books I read in March and April. I'm hoping to read a few more books that just grab my attention. I think I might be a bit more critical and just have the guts to stop reading a book if I'm not really feeling it, because I've not been doing that, and I think because of that I've actually been reading less. So yeah, I hope you've had better reading months. I'm thinking of maybe reading a bit more non-fiction, although I'm having to write quite a lot for my dissertation, and then maybe I just read a really engrossing fantasy book. I don't know. Now I'm just rambling. I'm going to see you very soon, hopefully, if I can think of it. And bye-bye.